Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the Cinderella teams from the SEC. I got into Texas A&M and Oklahoma this time around. We'll definitely revisit some other conferences throughout the week and give you guys an idea of who I think could steal the show out there as well. But let's get into a new segment called Monday Questions. I figure we're getting a little bit closer to the college football season, and I feel like it's time to really start answering some questions, start to get down to brass tacks here. And I want this to be kind of an interactive segment. So you guys, leave a question that you have for future segments that we'll do on this and give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about with this upcoming segment. I did 3 questions of my own today, but I want to do 3 every Monday, whether it's, a prediction that you have that you want me to react to, or a question that you have about the upcoming season, about a specific team, about a specific player. Anything is on the table for this. So I definitely want to hear from you guys and definitely incorporate some of the questions going forward. But let's get into what I have for today. And I think there's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot of different questions that we can ask for this one, but I wanted to start with a kind of a broad one, and I'll give you a broad one, kind of medium broad, and then a very specific one. So just to give you guys an idea of what the questions could be. And for this one, what is the most important thing for the future of this sport? There are tons of things that I would argue are wrong about this sport right now that need to be figured out in the future and need to be figured out as quickly as possible. And I think that is anything from NIL to a payment structure going forward to transfer portal to whatever, what have you. It doesn't necessarily matter. There's a number of things that very much need to be figured out going forward in this game. To me, there's nothing more important in the future of this sport than leadership. I think right now we are looking at college football with a governing body that doesn't really yield a lot of power. Now they stand over the sport. They definitely are the quote-unquote governing body, but when you don't have a lot of enforceable rules, when you don't necessarily have the same power that some of the conference commissioners have in some of these rooms that you need to have power in, it's not necessarily where you want it to be, right? The NCAA is not necessarily doing the things that you want to do. You want seen done from a leadership perspective in college football, and they haven't necessarily been doing that for quite some time. And I think college football in particular, they need a voice, whether it's one person, whether it's an entity, what have you. I don't frankly care, if I'm being totally honest with you. I care who the person is, obviously, but I don't care what form this takes. I want this to be a thing. I want a voice. I want, a clear way forward and order across the board for teams in the Big 12, teams in the ACC, teams in the SEC, the Big 10. I want them to be operating the same way. This sport feels like for the past, 5 years, it's been moving at very different paces. The SEC and Big 10 have been moving at one pace, the ACC and the Big 12 another. And it's caused a lot of problems. Now, what does the future look like in leadership in this? I don't really know. I think there's a lot of questions of how this is going to look going forward. Now, is it the NCAA keeping their power structure right there and, maybe making a little bit more waves, maybe doing a little bit better job going forward? Is it Greg Sankey? Is it one of those guys that steps up to the plate? Is it Tony Petitti that absolutely could be in on these conversations? So there are a million different ways that this thing can go, but there's no question about it. When we look at the future of the sport and there's a million different questions, the only way you answer those is with someone or sub-entity in front taking it and, actually caring about the sport and actually doing the right things about the sport. So you can't do any of this stuff without leadership. You can't do any of this stuff without a good structure in place. And until we have that, we're in kind of limbo in college football right now. But let's move on to Ole Miss and let's talk about, can they live up to the hype? I don't know if there's anyone going into this year that has quite as much hype to do something that they've never done before than Ole Miss. They have an incredible transfer portal class, a third-year starter. Lane Kiffin is coaching probably the best football he has in his career. And it lines up really well, right? They're ready to kick the door down. Now, will they? I'm not exactly sure. There's a really, really good roster on their hands. I mean, the defense in particular, they did a great job on that in the transfer portal. I mean, bringing in guys like Walter Nolan, Prince Emmanuel, and Chris Hardy on the front line is going to be absolutely incredible. Then you have Brandon Turnage, Trey Amos, Isaiah Hamilton on the back end. So they did plenty of work on that defensive side of the ball to make sure this isn't a problem. The one area that I am a little bit skeptical of is the O-line, because I think it's not necessarily quite as solid as you'd like it to be. They did bring in some great transfers, a couple from Washington that absolutely will help them out, but I don't know if it's necessarily where they want it to be as of right now. The wide receiver group is going to be absolutely incredible. Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins is about as good as it gets. And then you add Caden Prescore into the conversation, and it gets really, really interesting. So I think Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss are in a great position. They can do pretty much anything they want to do this upcoming season. They can win the SEC. They can go undefeated. They can, win the playoff. They can have a remarkable season. Now, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope with the transfer portal class that they brought in, a lot of the guys that have to hitting the way that you want them to. But at the end of the day, this is a team that has essentially everything in place. I am a little skeptical buying Ole Miss stock right now, I'll be totally honest with you. But I do think when you look at this team and you ask, can they live up to the hype? There's no reason they can't. That's for sure. There's a ton of things that tell me that this team is ready for that next step. And until we get on the football field, it'll be really hard to tell if they're able to really kick the door down or not. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. But let's finish it off with Drew Allar. And let's talk about, is he ready to take that next step? Will he take a big leap going into this next season? And in my opinion, he might be the biggest or one of the biggest dominoes in the entire sport from a player perspective. When you talk about if this kid can reach a ceiling, Penn State is a team that could turn the Big Ten on its head. It could be Penn State at the very top. It could be everyone else fighting for second, frankly. I think that's how talented this kid is. I think that's what his ceiling is. Now, last year didn't necessarily give you too many reasons to be overly bullish about his ability to pull off that big-time leap, but at the end of the day, the tools are incredible. He kind of reminds me of Jackson Arnold in the sense that he is NFL build, and he has NFL arm talent. Now, does he have NFL decision-making? Not so much, but that's definitely something that he'll try to develop throughout the season. One of the biggest questions for Drew Allar going into this season is who's he going to throw the football to? Now, Julian Fleming, I feel like, is a relatively known commodity. Now, I don't necessarily know if it's a wide receiver commodity, or wide receiver one commodity, excuse me, but a good player nonetheless. Definitely someone that will help their offense. Caden Saunders, as I talked about last week, I think he's the key that really opens up this offense to be not just good, but elite. I think Harrison Wallace absolutely has a chance to break out. Tyler Warren will be kind of that security blanket at tight end. So there are some things to like. It's not necessarily the group that Penn State wants. It's actually definitely not the group that Penn State wants. But the reality is there's a lot of good things there. And then Andy Kotelnicki is really the key here. If he can unlock this kid and put this kid in winning positions, he's going to be successful. The question is, how successful can they win the Big Ten? Can they go to the playoff and maybe compete for a national title? It all rides on that kid's shoulders, and that's a lot of pressure. There's a lot going into the season for Drew Allar, but at the end of the day, from where I'm standing, I would lean more that he takes a big step forward than he stands right still. Now, I don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to reach the lofty goals that he absolutely has for himself, but I do think that he will take a step forward. I do think that he'll be a much more consistent week-to-week quarterback than he was a year ago, and Penn State has a lot of stuff in place to where as long as that one thing happens, a lot of other things can happen right after it that would be very, very good for Penn State football. So again, to finish this out here, I would love to have some of y'all's questions on here. Definitely don't necessarily want to be speaking to myself every time around here. So would love to be, pulling a couple of questions from the comment section or from wherever going forward for this segment. So definitely leave any comments you have, any questions, any predictions, anything really, and I'll find a way to kind of put a spin on it and have some fun on Fridays at the end of the show. So definitely will be a really, really good time trying to make this show just a little bit more interactive between me and you guys. So definitely will be a really good time for all of us. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for every single content update you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing incredible work across every single sport. So whatever you need in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.